What's good, y'all? Welcome to the John Katz Show, episode number 56. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I really appreciate it. Hope everybody's having a great week. Had a couple topics I wanted to get into real quick. I haven't done a solo ep in a minute. I talk about all the time. These really are kind of cathartic for me. I was talking about with the recent guest, Aggie. We were talking about journaling, and I go, you know what? The pod's kind of my journal to pour out some thoughts here and there. And I love having guests, and I do want to mostly do interviews and guests and stuff like that. But the solo ones in particular, it's funny because sometimes I think, well, the solo stuff is not as well received, or I don't want it to be repetitive or redundant and stuff like that. But to be honest, I've gotten some really amazing feedback from people lately, and I cannot fucking tell you guys how much I appreciate it. Seriously, I'm not saying that lightly. But in particular, some people have said some really, gracious, meaningful things. And it means more than they probably know. And like I said, the solo stuff in particular, it is kind of a cathartic, personal journal type experience for me. But ultimately, I do share things because I feel like it's the type of stuff people could kind of benefit from. And again, I'm nobody to be an expert in helping anybody else, but I do like to think that the human experience is pretty similar for a lot of us, and I for sure think, or I know, that some of the stuff that's helped me most is hearing and seeing other people talk about experiences that I can relate to. And something I say all the time is that I believe we are supposed to draw inspiration and even motivation from one another. And again, not that I'm one to motivate anyone. It is much of the adage of taking your own advice type of thing. But I do also believe, people that have gone through certain things and those experiences have forced them into different types of self-discovery and the way they analyze and interpret life and so forth. But my point being that it's just really nice sometimes because you do sit here and you think, well, I'm just kind of doing this as this personal X, Y, and Z, and I like to share it and some people watch and so forth. And then you hear some really specific, meaningful things. And just so you guys know, I do appreciate that more than anything. Thank you. So what's been going on? I just finally finished Succession, the show Succession. Spoiler alert, because I'm going to get into the show. So if you haven't watched it yet, I just watched the series finale, and I wanted to talk about that a little bit. So if you haven't seen it, fast forward this part or whatever. It's a really great, unique show. I got into it when it had first come out, and I kind of really immediately got hooked on it. Just the level of acting. Succession. It's on HBO, 4 seasons. Brian Cox plays the billionaire tycoon father of these rich adult kids, and it's all the trials and tribulations of business and their personal lives and everything else. And the main kid is Jeremy Strong, and then Macaulay Culkin's little brother. By the way, it's got to suck for Kieran Culkin every time because I do it every time. I'm like, yeah, Kieran Culkin's in it, Macaulay's little brother. It's like for life, you're known as Macaulay Culkin's little brother. But he's actually a hell of an actor. The joke in the show is that nobody's really acting. They say Shiv's like the only one, the sister. The character annoys the shit out of me, especially in the end. I want to talk about that because she was actually bothering me a lot. But I think I kind of afterwards dissected what was really going on there. I'm not sure. I want to share my interpretation of the finale and then get you guys' thoughts on it as well. And y'all can always hit me up on Twitter, JohnCatz79. In any case, yeah, Brian Cox, Jeremy Strong. Jeremy Strong, the main son, the show is such a tragedy, and he does such a good job of capturing the essence of like tragic acting. And it was funny, I mentioned a while ago, maybe a year or so ago, because I'm very into synchronicities, as you guys know. And one of the big ones was I happened to be watching Succession, and I was going, man, this guy is either really like this in real life, or he's the most amazing fucking actor ever, And guys, by the way, I apologize. I've had a little bit of a throat thing the last week or two, so if I sound a little extra hoarse or raspy, my apologies. But yeah, in any case, the main dude played by Jeremy Strong, his name's Kendall in the show. Right after I had tweeted pontificating about how this dude goes about playing this role and what he's like in real life. I hadn't seen him he's in some other big movie that I can't remember the name of now, and I hadn't actually seen it, and I actually still haven't seen it. I should go back and watch because I want to see him act in other stuff. Now I'm very curious, to be honest. But within a couple hours of me tweeting, pontificating about that, a whole article came out where they had interviewed him about every aspect of this role in the show, discussing exactly how he goes about playing this character and approaching that role. And he takes it serious. He's one of these like full-on method actors who's always in character. And then I recently saw Brian Cox, who plays his father, in another interview talking about how Jeremy can get a little too carried away with all that. And he's like, I want him to relax sometimes, go back to his trailer and smoke a joint or something. Because not all actors do that. You hear that all the time. Some actors are goofing around on set, totally in their normal real life personality, fucking around, eating. They say action and they just jump in and they act. And then there's other people who are they get into character. And while they're on set, even when they're not filming, they're staying in that character. And that's interesting, the way different people's brains work. And then there's probably a lot of gray area in between. There's probably a lot of people who they have to prepare for a certain type of scene, a certain type of emotion. They're not going to be goofing around on set and they're about to do some tragic scene where they have to cry their eyes out, etc. So I'm sure there's a lot of people that kind of do a mixture. But yeah, you hear about a lot of actors that just become that person even when they're at home and they don't break character during the entire filming. Obviously Heath Ledger, Joker, and things like that. You hear about Adrian Brody as the pianist, apparently lived in like some stone hut in the snow where he was essentially really starving himself to play that amazing role. But in any case, yeah, the show is just so tragic. And again, spoiler alert, in the second to last episode was really emotionally something. The father passed away earlier in the season, but they had the funeral services for him. And there was just a lot of parts that were tough to watch. In fact, the episode where he died, we had lost our dad a few years ago, and my sister's a big fan of Succession, and she had called me after the episode where he died. She's like, John, wasn't that really fucking hard to watch? Our dad, God rest his soul, a million amazing qualities. I could go on and on, but yeah, he was a bit of a hard ass too. He was a bit of a grinder, and obviously he's not the Brian Cox character. And when I say hard ass, I should clarify, because a lot of people say their dad's a hard ass. He wasn't a hard ass as a father at all. He let us get away with murder from a very young age. Never really even spanked us or anything like that. So I should, wasn't a drinker. I should clarify. When I say a hard ass, I kind of mean a hard ass in life and in business. And he was I don't want to say rude, he was relentless in that sense. So I could see a lot of the correlations there. But even without that part, just watching, and that's why I mentioned. So in the funeral episode, you actually finally see some real emotional moments from characters that you almost never get to see, because there's such an estranged disconnect the entire series between this ruthless father and his adult billionaire children that each have their own set of crazy issues that they're trying to manage. There's never really any love lost, but then you see the Kieran Culkin character in particular really breaks down at the funeral. That whole funeral service, his father, by the way, I mentioned James Cromwell on Twitter, who plays Brian Cox's brother in the show, and he appears in it every so often. What an amazing actor. I tweeted what an amazing fucking actor he is, and I remember him from 6 Feet Under, and somebody replied and said, isn't he the dude who glued his hand to the Starbucks counter in protest? I never heard, I ignore people's real lives for a reason, but I looked it up. Apparently he had some protest over soy milk or something, and he glued his hand to a Starbucks counter, I think a few years back. So listen, I can't vouch for the guy in real life. He's a hell of a fucking actor. But he gets up and he gives this whole, it starts out so sentimental about him and the brother immigrating over as little kids during World War II. And he tells this heartbreaking story about how Brian Cox, the main character, the one who's passed, when he had come home from like a boarding school as a kid, his sister got polio and died, their little sister. And he had always thought he gave it to her, that he was responsible. It was so heartbreaking. And that the parents let him kind of think that. And it really, gave you sympathy for someone who's passed now that you almost never have sympathy for throughout the show. And you're like, yeah, that kind of explains that would fuck somebody up in that particular way for sure. But then he breaks into this whole excoriating thing really about what a prick his dead brother is. And it was hard to watch because, you know, to disparage somebody after they passed, even if they were an asshole, certainly not at their funeral. So the Kieran Culkin character gets up, he tries to speak, and he just loses it. He breaks down, and it's such a heart-wrenching moment. And, you know, he sees his dad in the coffin there off to the side, and he really loses it. And then Kendall gets up and gives just the greatest fucking honest, objective. Here's what's great about it. I like when a show makes you think and appreciate multiple perspectives. Here's where I was going with this whole meandering, rambling rant. Is that the whole series you think this guy's the biggest prick in the world, which he pretty much is. And then the brother gets up and he really puts an exclamation point on what a prick his brother was. But then the son, who has more reason to hate him than anyone in the world, and gets up there and objectively calls him a prick too, but essentially says, hey, look, he was a force of nature in this world. And look at what he accomplished. And look at the jobs he created. And he could walk into any room in the world and be comfortable. And you go, you know what? It made me appreciate, because you apply it to humanity in real life, these types of things. And I do think, I think we need some ruthless killers on our side in the world. I'm not saying people should be sociopaths and stuff like that, but if it wasn't for some of these type dudes that are just willing to say, fuck personal relationships, fuck having a normal life, I'm going to be a ruthless, relentless, 20-hour-a-day working killer, and I'm going to build an empire. I think that's how some of the greatest things get accomplished, and I don't know that we need those guys in particular to be so kind-hearted. And look, everyone should have empathy and everything else, but again, it really makes you appreciate both sides of the coin. I'd say, look, obviously for me, interpersonally in my life, I don't want to be in relationships with those types of people, but then I can still appreciate, like, I wouldn't want to be their kid. I wouldn't want to be their spouse, but at the same time, I can appreciate that they exist in the world and the value that people like that bring to the world, because it's so rare that people could do that. And to be honest, depending on what it is, I think you have to be that to accomplish certain things. I don't know that it's possible. And yeah, society's changed and tech has changed. And I think it was the season prior even, you know, he was talking to his kid about the idea of, you know, them taking over when he's gone. And he says, you know, you're not a killer. He's flat out, you're not a killer. But he says, you know, I don't know if you need that today the way you used to. He's like, I just don't know. And yeah, back in the day, I think you really had to be that type of grinder. You know, now I think technology's maybe changed it a little bit, and the way people are a little more averse to a certain type of mentality, but still. But so there was this weird scene. You know, the whole series has been this power struggle. Everybody's in a power struggle with everyone the entire time. They're all backstabbing each other. They're all trying to one-up, finagle their way into better positions and more money, and it's a very cutthroat, tragic, dark series, but it's just so fucking entertaining and well done. And the dynamic between these siblings, I mean, what a roller coaster. And so the main two brothers, Kendall and the Kieran Culkin character, his name is Roman. Kendall's his older brother. You know, they have this scene, and for people that saw it, you know what I'm talking about. So I'm not going to keep explaining the whole show. All right, let me do that. I'm going to assume the people that are listening and don't want the spoiler alerts know what the fuck I'm talking about. All right, so guys, that scene where Kendall and Roman are hugging each other, I was a little confused by that. I had to watch it again. I'm like, what? He hugs him so close, and Roman has a busted eye from when he had got in a mix-up with these protesters earlier. And Kendall's pressing his wounded eye against his shoulder, like purposely rubbing the stitches off. And it looks like Roman's kind of doing it on purpose too. And I'm like, what's going on here? And I looked it up after, because I was like, I want to see. Here's what's interesting. Most stuff I found online was saying that it was kind of that Don Corleone moment that like Al Pacino had with Fredo. And it was also Kendall asserting dominance over Roman the way his dad used to. Because Roman was kind of like the joke in the family, the youngest brother, and he's a weird goofball. And so they all kind of bully him, and they're always trying to like manipulate him to be on their side and everything else. You feel bad for Roman basically the whole series. But so they were like, oh, Kendall's asserting his dominance over him. It's this act of superiority because Kendall thinks he's about to be the new CEO now that the dad's gone. And this was all during this struggle of who's going to be CEO. But I don't know. The way that Roman was doing it on purpose, it was almost like this masochistic kind of thing. Like Roman was basically, before that hug, he was really struggling emotionally. He's like, I can't do this. I can't be here. I don't want to be here. Let me out of here. It was almost like he was doing it purposefully to inflict pain on himself because he was going, fuck you. And he was rubbing it. Like almost like he had to go into savage mode to stay there and do what needed to be done. So I disagree with what they were saying. I don't know that Kendall was just flat out asserting some alpha dominance over him like a bully, because Roman wasn't trying to pull away and he was doing it on purpose. I think he was kind of going into his own version of like war mode where he was ripping his stitches out like, all right, let's go fucking do this, brother. I don't know. I gotta maybe let that marinate a little more. Tell me what y'all think about it. It was a weird scene. And then Shiv. All right, here's my thing. Which, first of all, then there was that other crazy intense scene where Roman basically said Kendall's kids aren't his kids. He's like, I had to look that up for clarification too. Essentially, he was saying one of your kids is adopted and the other one came from a sperm donor. And then Kendall like basically tried to rip his face off. But Shiv though, come on, like what the fuck is she doing? Pick a fucking side. Pick a team. Who's waffling and wavering around that much? And then to go in there, look, I don't care what you think. Don't agree with Kendall and them that you're going to go in there and vote this whole time. You come in there, this solid team for 2 days. You had this amazing, by the way, the scene back at the mother's house was maybe my favorite scene of the series because they were all acting like loving sibling kids again. And they were in the mom's kitchen mixing shit up in the blender. And Roman's eating the stepdad's cheese and everything, licking the cheese. It was the funniest fucking scene. They were all bonding. They went in with solidarity and united. If you had a problem, Shiv, say something beforehand. Why are you going to go in there and fucking undercut the dude like that last minute and be like, oh, so here's my theory on that. It's the only thing that's going to let me sleep at night. And I couldn't find this online either, but here's my personal theory. Couple things. One, yeah, the show is a tragedy. So for Kendall to be the CEO, it almost wouldn't suit the trajectory of the show, right? Because if you look at even Kendall, the actor that plays him, I mentioned Jeremy Strong, he was even apprehensive about doing a 4th season. He's like, look, this character's arc is kind of already tanked out where it needs to be. So had he gotten what he wanted and been the CEO, it wouldn't have really fit the tragic nature of the series. But to excuse Shiv's behavior, I have to think that she was, and I wish she would have kind of intimated this or they would have kind of clued us in somehow because, again, this is just my own personal theory. I think she was doing it for Kendall and Roman, right? Because, again, she saw what her dad became and what her dad was, and Kendall was becoming the dad. And I don't think she wanted that for her brothers. You know, they were selling the company and making a huge profit. They're all going to be billionaires for life regardless. So it's not like their lives were being ruined. They just weren't going to be owning and running the company that was their dad's. But I think she did it for them. I think she did it for Kendall. I think she looked at what he was becoming and went, hey, wait a fucking minute. Because she just kept telling him, you won't be good at it. You won't be good at it. But I don't know. I have to think because they were just bonding like that, like why fuck him over unless you're really doing him a favor or you're just doing it for selfish reasons? Because she's not getting anything from it unless she just wanted out completely too. But I don't know. Let me know what y'all think about that part. That's enough about, I wasn't planning on talking about Succession for 20. Kind of segues into some of the stuff I did want to talk about, to be honest. And again, if you haven't seen the show, watch the show. Sorry if I just spoiled everything for somebody out there. But yeah, I relate, not that I can relate to, you know, these billionaires and everything else, but I relate to a lot of the family dynamic stuff and maybe, unfortunately, some of the tragic parts. There's a huge underlying theme at the end about forgiveness. And I talk about forgiveness a lot, but the more stuff I find myself analyzing in life, externally, internally, all the growth, all the lessons, everything that's come up during my midlife existential crisis, it so much of it comes back to forgiveness and gratitude. And by the way, those go hand in hand as well. But people really have such a hard time letting things go. And one of the huge keys to life really does appear to be openness. And when you're fully open, it's the opposite of hanging on to things, hanging on to regrets or worries or pain, and not being able to forgive certain things. You know, they always say forgiveness isn't for the other person, it's for you. And that's really so true. So like if somebody really does wrong you, you go, I can't ever forgive them. You're not forgiving them for them. You're not doing them any favors. You're forgiving them for you so you can let go of that. Listen, if you're laying down at night angry, if you're walking around during the day angry at something somebody else did or is doing, that's like the worst way to punish yourself. You're choosing to punish yourself by hanging on to that pain and beating yourself up with it. That person's off doing some other thing. Probably not. Even if they are, who cares? They're thinking about you or not. If they're thinking about the thing they did or not, it's totally irrelevant. You're choosing to hang on to that thing. That person owns you in a way. And listen, 90% of the time, the person probably didn't even mean to hurt you anyway. But even if someone maliciously did the worst things imaginable, still, it's compounded infinitely by the fact you're hanging on to it. But here's the thing about forgiveness when it comes to ourselves more than anything. And this is what I've really, really come to learn, is that it's not just that forgiveness is for ourselves. It's actually almost always about forgiving ourselves. It's almost never even about forgiving the other person. Forgiving other people is actually pretty easy in comparison to forgiving ourselves. And that applies in a couple ways. It's in the obvious way, which is, let's say we do fuck up or do something wrong. It's so much harder to then forgive ourselves for doing it because we know we fucked up. And it's just that idea, oh, if I could just go back, change this one thing, now that I know this, or now that I feel that, if I could just do this little thing differently, say this other thing, change whatever. That's the shit that eats us up, right? Because when it's someone else's behavior, we don't feel responsible for it in the same way when it's our own. That's the stuff we obsess over. But then even more so across the board, here's the crazier part. When somebody really does do something externally to hurt us, whether intended or not, apply it to all of that, we still blame ourselves more than the other person, even when we shouldn't. We still have this thing where we go, yeah, but I allowed it to happen. Or yeah, but I should have seen this thing coming. I should have done this or I should have done that so that it didn't happen. I do that even with simple things like car wrecks. Even I've been in car wrecks that completely aren't my fault, and I still blame myself after. I'm like, fuck, I should have seen that guy coming out of the whatever. And that's just one simple example. Look, you see it with domestic abuse victims all the time. Look at how these women always blame themselves. I shouldn't have triggered. I shouldn't have set him off. I should, whatever. There's a million examples of that. So yeah, I think when it comes to forgiveness, when it comes to letting stuff go, sure, look, I always talk about it's about the lessons. That's number one. If you take a lesson from a bad experience, whether it's something you did, something somebody else did, whatever it is, if you take a lesson from it and you're able to apply that and it becomes something beneficial, well, that's a huge step, because now you could look at this bad thing and go, okay, well, now it's kind of a good thing, because even though it was terrible, I learned this thing and now I can apply it in all these other ways. That ties in so heavily with the forgiveness aspect, for sure. And, we can't go around blaming everybody else, because I mentioned this recently in regard to parents, right? You can objectively look at things your parents did and say, okay, XYZ is the reason for XYZ. That's fine. It's good to understand stuff. It's good to understand stuff so that you recognize it. You can dispel that, false belief that formed in you because of that thing, and then you can release it and let it go. But recognizing something and understanding why it caused certain things is totally different than blame. Because again, blame is you're hanging on to something, right? So if you blame your parents, if you're angry or resentful at your parents, for example, well, why? Because they did X, Y, Z to you and they didn't understand. Look, they're fucked up probably because their parents are fucked up, right? So that's a never-ending cycle of blame. You could go, well, my mom was this way and she was this and that. And look, if people are trying, if people are well-intentioned and they have a relatively good heart and they're pretty much doing the best they can, I could forgive and let go of pretty much anything. But if you're going to blame your parents, then you have to blame their parents, right? Because their parents probably did all kinds of shit to make them that way. But then you'd have to blame, your grandparents' parents, your great-grandparents, because, well, your grandparents wouldn't have been that way if not. It's a never-ending Break that cycle. Let it all go. People did the best they could. Even if they didn't, fuck it. What can you do? What can you do? You're going to go back and change some stuff? You can't. Don't let stuff have power over you. Don't choose to intentionally give things power over you. Don't put yourself in some mental prison for no reason. Yeah, I'll give you a good example how we kind of blame ourselves, even for stuff when we were kids, right? My mom chose to move us to Florida when I was 14, just after 8th grade going into high school, from a small town, Lynchburg, Virginia, where I was born and raised. And, you couldn't pick a worse time. And again, relatively speaking, a million kids have had it a million times worse. All right. They've moved dozens and dozens of times. I'm only speaking about my own personal experience here and my own psyche. I was born and raised in a place where I knew everyone. I knew everyone's family. I had hundreds of friends. I had a dozen close friends. Everyone knew everyone. Everyone knew everyone's family. You couldn't go out anywhere without running into a million people. It was that kind of place. I've been in the same classes with the same kids since nursery school. And my mom says, hey, we're moving to Florida. Now, I won't give you the whole boring contextual details of my childhood and everything. My parents were divorced. Our parents were divorced. My dad was up in Jersey. We moved down here. My sister went up to Jersey to live with my dad. Okay. When she said we were moving here, obviously I was devastated, right? So there was months where I just was begging and pleading not to move, that I wanted to stay. I wanted to finish high school with all my closest friends that I've known since I was 5 years old, obviously. And want to move to some strange town in South Florida and start a new high school. And that's like the worst. It's such an awkward age, and you're going through puberty, and I already had other issues and everything too, so it was far from ideal. The reason I mention it is that's something I harbor resentment about my whole life, really. It's really the one thing I think I had the hardest time forgiving. But here's why it's interesting, because when I really thought about it many years later, the thing I was always so upset about, even as an adult, because I'm like, damn, I really wish we would have just stayed there. And, and I've lost touch with so many of these people throughout life, because it's different when you move away from middle school. And yeah, I still go back and visit some of my closest friends. But my point being, when I would look back, I wasn't necessarily looking back at anger toward my mom for not just waiting a few years to move, but I would look back and be mad at myself for not convincing her to get us to stay, because I could have and should have. That's how I looked at it. And I realized that was the part that I was obsessing over the most. I would almost have like this fantasy where adult John could like enter the body of young John and speak on his behalf. And again, I was 13, 14 years old, and I'm still blaming myself as that kid, because how could you have not been convincing enough in your argument? How could you have not conveyed how important it was that you be able to stay there? So it did. It took a long time to and again, moving one time as a kid, look, that might not sound significant to some people. I don't know. For me, it was the most impactful. And I think it caused a lot of issues. But I can look at that objectively and say everyone was doing the best they could with what they knew how. And she was a few years younger than me when she made that decision. So, that's a kid. That's a baby. And like I always say, life's so messy, and everyone's got their own brain and psyche and soul to deal with 24 hours a day. So to try to interpret why people do that stuff and have to satiate certain things within themselves, you have to think about how insane a process that is for you personally, and then apply that to other people. Somebody brought up a while ago, I should do a much better job of citing and writing down where I hear things, because I don't remember where I heard it or read it, but they described this word I didn't know, sonder, as describing I was familiar with the phenomenon. That's why I found it so interesting. It was describing this phenomenon we have. And I get this when I'm sitting in traffic a lot, where you have this realization that every person around you is living this intricate, complicated life just like yours. And not that we don't already know that, but you kind of get into, and again, maybe people can't relate, but you fall into almost like this trance-like state where you can see that and feel it, and you can look around at people and you can feel that complexity, because there's only a handful of people in your life that you really truly know on a deep, deep, deep level anyway. There's how many billions and billions of people around the world. So every one of these people is just as immersed in their own shit as you are, and even people that you know and that you're close with. That applies across the board. But I think always being conscious of that really does help with interpersonal stuff and with not personalizing things, because almost never are things personal. 99.9% of the stuff that people take personally is not actually intended personally toward that person. And that's what fucks up everybody. It fucks up everybody, from romantic relationships to siblings to parents and kids and everything else. Somebody's acting a certain way for the most personal reasons imaginable, stuff you could spend the rest of your life trying to study and interpret and you wouldn't be able to. That's why they're acting that way. And then you, as their loved one or their associate or their friend or whatever, you're now taking that on personally as something having to do with you. And that dynamic, that type of interaction, really is responsible for like the vast majority of conflict that I see going on with people. No question. It's that type of misunderstanding. And then the ironic, tragic part is people just are dying to be understood, right? It's like the constant. People want to be understood so badly. You know, one of the other main aspects of forgiveness that I found, then again, I can only speak for myself. So for me personally, in my own experience, one of the main things that I have found relates to forgiveness the most is being able to show compassion. And because here's why it ties in. Because for me personally, and when I talk about forgiving myself for stuff, I've had a huge issue with, here's the thing. I feel I'm a very empathetic, compassionate person, okay? But I can also be a very defensive person. And here's what I've observed with myself and with other people, is that it's a whole lot easier to be empathetic or compassionate when you don't feel responsible for the issue or the problem or causing a person pain. So what I mean by that is I can watch a show or a movie and get choked up so easily, right? I'm so sentimental, okay? You show me a sad thing with a puppy, I'm emotional about it. I hear a song, whatever. Somebody tells me a story of something tragic that happened in their life, I feel physically touched by them telling me this, okay? But that's because I have no relation to that stuff. I have no emotional skin in that game. And I can't tell you how many times I should have been more empathetic or compassionate to something and I wasn't, because I was subconsciously in such a defensive, kind of shameful almost posture. Because when we feel personally responsible for stuff, it's really hard to then simultaneously be empathetic in that moment. At least if you have the John Katz disease, it is. And it's often that later when I step back and really look at it, I go, oh shit, I was so caught up in my own emotional turmoil that I didn't even have the space or capacity or awareness, or self-awareness to even step outside of that and be an actual compassionate, empathetic person. And that's the kind of stuff I've always had the hardest time forgiving myself for, because you look back and you're like, fuck, it's so clear now. It's so clear now. And then you go into this thing, you're like, what was I really thinking in that moment? What was my frame of mind? Something else I've always had an issue with in life, and this is kind of nuanced. I don't know if you're going to understand what I'm talking about, but if I'm in a certain frame of mind or emotion, if I'm in a certain emotional state, good or bad, this applies to highs and lows, I can't feel anything else. I can't even feel the idea that anything else exists. I can objectively and intellectually say, okay, I feel really shitty right now, and I know for sure I felt great before in other times, but there's a permanence to the feeling itself that it's like I'm always going to be in this state. And again, even when things are good and I feel like, oh, I figured this thing out, or I got over this specific hump, whatever. It's like people who go, oh, I hear it in golf a lot. Everyone I know that golfs and who's terrible and is like obsessed with it, they're always like, yeah, I figured out this thing. I've been stroking, whatever. And then they're out there the next week and they're just lost again. It's like that. It's like when you're grooving it out there on the golf course. You can't imagine the feeling of when you're just fucking shanking everything. So I've really consciously tried to recognize that about myself and then step outside of that. I've come to find how many things, I've always been like, hey, you're either born with this thing or you're not. And some stuff, yes, you're born with it or you're not. but a lot of stuff is effort things. And you can improve so many aspects. And the idea that our souls are eternal and we're not limited to this lifetime is even more reason to try to improve those things. And it's even more reason to kind of sit back and go, hey, it's never too late. Because even just learning this thing internally and changing this thing internally about myself is something that I now get to carry into the next life. I'm evolving my soul. I'm growing and learning on a soul basis. Because, yeah, I do believe if not, we carry it with us. But, listen, who knows? Nobody knows. This life in particular is short. Those things are not antithetical. Even if our souls are eternal, this particular life is short as fuck. Don't take shit for granted. I was talking about that recently. Do not. Those are the hardest things to forgive myself for. Taking stuff for granted. Don't do that. I say souls are eternal or life's eternal, consciousness are eternal or whatever. Again, that's not a reason to go, well, fuck this. What does this life mean anything at all? That's such a surface way to look at it. People go, why does anything fucking matter then? What's this life have to do with anything? Why should I bother even taking a shower or brushing my teeth or eating healthy or whatever? No, the fact that it's an eternal journey is even more the reason to do that. It's even more reason to take it seriously, right? It would be more of a throwaway if when we die, the lights just go off and that's it. Because then you'd be like, well, then, yeah, fuck it. Then what is... At that point, I'd be like, well, what the fuck does it matter then? I'll just do whatever. But if the way that I'm treating my soul and my body and people in my life, if that really matters on some eternal soul level, well, that really makes it all that more important. And yeah, don't take shit for granted. Look at how you treat people and the ways you disappoint people, and we still have free will for sure. And yeah, some stuff you can't undo. You just can't. I think you can fix a lot of things. You can learn from things. You can start over in many cases. Life goes on, but you can't fully ever just go back once you've taken certain steps forward in the wrong direction. Here's something I was thinking about recently. And again, this is kind of a nuanced, weird thing, but I talk a lot about like taking chances and being vulnerable and all that. And I talk about that because it's like one of my biggest knocks on myself throughout life. It's that I've been really averse to that, to leaving my comfort zone and not being in control of my own little personal environment. And I think that's cost me a lot of experiences and relationships and all kinds of stuff, for sure. And I think that applies to a lot of people. But here's something I was thinking about in relation to that. It's a form of dishonesty almost to be that way. Like, unless you're going to completely isolate. What I mean by that is, like, if you're going to show a certain part of yourself to somebody, don't give people something that you are not comfortable maintaining, if that makes sense. It's like, if you're not willing to take risks and be open and vulnerable consistently with people, then don't even show them that open, vulnerable side of you at all. I don't know if that makes any sense, but it's almost like you're giving people a false sense of yourself. Ironically, it's the truest sense of yourself, but yeah, if you show somebody and share with them the truest form of yourself, but then you're afraid or unwilling to actually be that yet in this life, it is like a very deep form of dishonesty. And it's something I'm certainly trying to be more aware of. And I think it's something a lot of people go through. And that whole thing I just said might not make any fucking sense at all. But yeah, it's all a mystery, this life. I saw an article recently. I shared it on Twitter, a physics. The more I see and hear these physics people talk and these the scientific theories implicate that our consciousness is an integral part of the universe itself, and certainly that our consciousness and everything is energy. It doesn't die when these bodies die, and that's science coinciding with spirituality. And I don't know shit, and I'm not knocking anybody's takes on religion or anything like that. That just always made the most sense to me. And then the more stuff I've heard and the more stuff I've read, It's the only stuff that just settles in me and goes, okay, that actually makes sense with what I've always felt. It's all one thing. It's all an infinite connected loop. People really are all basically the same at the end of the day. That's what really drives me nuts. People are getting so far away from. There's a lot of emphasis on individuality and all that, and that's great. See, here's the thing. This is why it's such an ironic phenomenon, because I believe more than anything, people need to get to their true nature, their truest nature. But when you get to your truest nature, you're not going to be out there putting yourself into some weird label and category and your hair is you're not going to be trying to fit in to some new label that's been created in the name of. People are doing that stuff in the name of individuality, and I get it. Like I said, everyone wants to be understood. Everyone wants to be understood, and everyone's a little lonely. So I totally get the inclination and the impulse to want to do that kind of stuff. But the ironic part is that if we all really did get down to our truest human individual nature, even, what we'd actually find is that we're much more alike than we are different. Getting down to our truest nature wouldn't separate us out into 50 different genders and categories and everything else. Getting down to our truest individual nature, we would all actually end up, in my opinion, coming together more, because we'd be like, oh, we really are all like 90% the same, all these commonalities that we have. And not to harp on music all the time, but it is such a great example. And I can't tell you, because I tweet music videos now more than ever. And even for my tiny little bullshit, it's just such a microcosm of what I'm talking about, because I'll say it for the millionth time, art, whether it's music or even movies or books or poetry or actual artwork, whatever it is, it touches people on a much deeper level than any of that serve. It touches at the humanity, the parts of us that are all the same. And so even my tiny little microcosm of tweeting my music videos, if you look at the people that are liking those or even commenting on them, that's from all spectrums. And I don't even just mean that politically, but politically for sure. You look at people that are on there screaming bloody murder at each other, they're both liking that particular song, because it doesn't matter. Because our base human nature has nothing to do with all these societal, governmental, political, whatever these wars we've created and waged within our own surface interactions. The universe is indifferent to that shit. It does not care. So yeah, with that in mind, I would say everyone could probably use a little bit more understanding, a little more kindness toward each other, a little more empathy, a lot more grace. Where's the fucking gracefulness? And I am far from perfect, and I'll slip up 10 million more times, but it's cliche. If everyone would just be really well served to kind of look around and understand that everyone really is going through some shit. It ain't just you. Everyone's going through shit. If we keep that in mind, we're always well-intentioned. Gratitude. Favorite quote, I've shared it a bunch. Dude talking about, yeah, we learn from our mistakes, but yes, we're going to still make more mistakes. Yeah, there's no perfection. We learn the best we can. We try the best we can. And we need each other for that type of inspiration. This whole idea that people have fallen into of trying to knock everybody down and trying to bring everybody down, and why does this dude get to have this? And there's so much resentment. There's so much misery loves company attitude going around, and it should be the opposite. It should be, I want everyone to succeed. I want to see people do great things. I want to watch excellence. I want to be inspired by all the amazing things other people are doing. It's going to make me think I can do more amazing things, and so on and so on and so on. Should all be just uplifting each other and being inspired and motivated by each other, not trying to just tear each other down and be so contrarian and tribal and divisive. That's all. All right. Preachy John has entered the chat. I will stop ranting I'll stop mansplaining to y'all how to be a good person. Really, I love you guys. And thank you so much for tuning in. I really appreciate it. And again, I can't say enough about some of the warm feedback I've gotten recently. So truly thank you for that. And I will be back in a few days or so with another episode for you guys and some more guests coming up. Please keep an eye out for that. And I hope everybody is having a beautiful week. Love y'all. Appreciate y'all. See y'all soon. Be good.